podcasting from beautiful Leesburg, Virginia. Welcome to the Music Educator Podcast, bringing you tips, tricks, and practical advice that you can use tomorrow. Here's your host and fellow music educator, Bill Stevens.
Welcome to the Music Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Stevens. The title of this podcast is 7 Ways Music Educators Inspire Students. If you've ever been a music student in a studio or college, public or private school, you know that there are many more ways these selfless educators inspire and change the lives of our students on a daily basis. In my heart, these sorts of acts cannot be repaid in full, but rather should be passed down to others. I certainly don't want to use this post to self-promote myself, but I'd rather identify the experiences I've had in school and recognize the inspiration actions of these other music educators. So it's my hope that you can relate to these scenarios and possibly you can suggest more fantastic ways that educators contribute to inspire students. The first approach I'd like to discuss with you is the idea to nurture student ambitions. Nurturing student ambitions are based on the idea of building a quality student-teacher relationship. This approach to inspire students is based on a student-centered concept. And I would like to recognize my high school band director. We're going to call him Mr. M. Now, Mr. M took me in as a brand new music student the second semester of my freshman year in high school. And I truly didn't have much of a music background until I joined the high school band and didn't know what to expect. My only real contact with anyone, even in the school's music department, were a few friends that I had in band. Now, I was a young freshman boy in high school, looking to find himself, and this seemed like a pretty good place to start. If I knew how much of a powerful influence music actually was going to be for me, I would have certainly started classes in music much earlier. Now, Mr. M did not necessarily inspire me through a single action, but he rather guided me to grow as a student musician all 3.5 years I actually had him as a teacher. He demonstrated that he cared because he worked with me. He joked with me and also provided me the guidance necessary to be able to take part in activities that other students didn't. As a result of his leadership and the lessons in teamwork, I learned that being a band director was exactly what I wanted to do. The next powerful way music educators inspire their students is by sharing their program ownership. Now, certainly, music educators need to have control of their own programs. However, the purpose of a school program is to enhance the lives of our students. Now, why not provide responsible students with leadership opportunities that prove to be powerful learning experiences and also help with the operations of your program? My next inspiration is based on the teaching of Dr. Tim Lautzenheiser. Dr. Tim Lautzenheiser is a huge music education advocate that truly believes in music education. He has written several student leadership publications that I've used with my very own program. And these resources can be used to help any student in marching band, choir council, or even a student government role. And now the concepts and activities that he uses to engage students and teachers provide a fresh, eye-opening perspective that breaks this mold. Now, if you check out the blog posts that I put out earlier in the week, there's a YouTube that details the idea of success versus significance. Now, I want you to ask yourself, do you want to be successful or significant as a leader? The third way music educators inspire their students is by providing out-of-school opportunities. Providing out-of-school opportunities to further student growth should be a normal goal for really any music educator. Unfortunately, not all opportunities are considered equal for students. Students are often at different levels of skill development. Some play instruments that are not used as much as others, and sometimes these opportunities come in limited supply. And I would suggest that every music educator make a conscious effort to provide your students at least a few opportunities that will shape their music education outside of the classroom. One particular source of inspiration came from an assistant director of mine I had in college. We're going to call him Mr. K. Now, something that separated Mr. K from other educators was that he always managed to provide me with regular paying gigs. And I'm sure every student would love to have this opportunity. Well, Mr. K's educational philosophy tied into his response to having a strong university relationship and also a strong relationship with the community. I was personally inspired by Mr. K's decision-making process and his tactful skill of digression. Now, Mr. K provided opportunities fairly, and he did so while meeting the level of expectations of the university administration. And in simple English, he made sure that every performance and gig was great while spreading the opportunity for wealth. And as college students, any money is usually good money. Sometimes, being the director, you have to play a bit of a political game that won't make everybody happy, and this is almost guaranteed. Through regular communication and positive rapport with the students, Mr. K has inspired an army of educators to go beyond the expectation of the classroom, teaching to be more than what society says they should be. Our fourth way that music educators inspire students is by successfully engaging students' intrinsic reward system. And successfully engaging our students' intrinsic reward system is a goal I wish I could reach each and every day. And for some students, this is easily done because they're self-motivated and they're pretty much rock stars. Unfortunately, for many students, they embrace the cultural norms that reinforce the idea of what's in it for me or extrinsic rewards. Now I'd like to talk about Mr. B. And well, he was one of my most influential college professors because he was a deep thinker and he was certainly a challenging teacher. He was not only challenging because he worked hard, but rather his class performance expectations mirrored the skill sets of what was expected by master teachers. And to me, he was like a prophet, essentially, who had limitless amount of wisdom that was basically available to anyone that was willing to listen. He taught me it's important to make mistakes in order to learn. He opened my eyes to the value of transference, which is the idea of taking lessons from one of the other disciplines and applying them to your classroom or another scenario. And finally, he taught me the value of family and understanding the sacrifices and balance points necessary to have a happy and healthy life as a director. The fifth way music educators inspire students is to help students meet basic human needs. And this is one of my favorite ways that music educators inspire students. Helping students meet their most basic human needs is not so much the most obvious technique, but truly one of the most important to me. And for the sake of this conversation, let me talk about an amazing high school guitar teacher that I used to teach with. And we're going to call her Mrs. R. And Mrs. R was a goal-oriented, task-driven, and professional coworker. Mrs. R and I quickly became friends, and now we can always bounce ideas off of each other. We shared a music room, and we regularly got an opportunity to watch each other teach. On several occasions, I observed her giving one particular student food. And I thought this was a little odd, but being that everybody in the classroom saw this too, I later came to find out that this child was homeless and didn't have much of a family life. Mrs. R had gone out of her way to share what she had just to make this one child feel a little more comfortable. Eventually, I found out this was not a singular occurrence, but rather the norm. Mrs. R explained to me that many of her students were homeless, had troubled pasts, and desperately needed an adult to show that they cared, since their parents were rarely even around. And this took me back. It helped me realize that despite what's expected at school, some of our students don't have the luxury of doing homework at home because they have to work just to help pay rent. Some students have to babysit their brothers and sisters while mom and dad are at work, or some of them don't even have parents to come home to. For her students coming to school and taking her guitar class, this was the singular highlight of their day. Mrs. R's students were inspired by her tough love and support. Like many of her students, Mrs. R had a tough upbringing in Detroit, Michigan, and she made it a point to comfort her students through a strong rapport that put her students at ease. Now, even though I didn't ever actually have Mrs. R as a personal teacher, I learned several humbling lessons along with her students of what really truly matters. The sixth way music educators inspire their students is to inspire your students to love music. Music is what centers our passion. Sharing this amazing force of nature and humanistic power with others is a great reason to be a teacher. However, it is not the only reason. I can't say that there is only one teacher that has inspired me to go into music. In fact, every music teacher I have come in contact with is passionate about music and sharing it with others. There is one teacher that helped broaden my perspective on music beyond the performance side of the art. And we'll call this teacher Dr. C. And Dr. C was a kind, knowledgeable, and deeply nurturing individual. Not only was she a world-class music educator, but she was also a music therapist. One of my last semesters in graduate school, I took a class entitled The Psychology of Music, which was taught by Dr. C. And this ended up being one of my favorite classes ever. And for some reason, I couldn't pinpoint one specific reason why I loved it. Was it the idea that it was a music class mixed with science and kinesthetic theories, or was it because it drove my perceptual interpretations? I loved that class and Dr. C so much because she was able to create the perfect learning environment for me. There was no fancy technological gizmos and unusual teaching aids. I just needed a fresh way to interpret music, and she opened my eyes to some amazing possibilities. I felt like the class was Bill Stevens-centered. However, the other 15 students would probably disagree. The great thing is that each of my students had an equally incredible experience, which was unique to their own special way of thinking due to Dr. C's teachings. Loving music is the best part of the music educator culture. We are a collective team that has the vision to share what God has provided us. I am inspired by this culture and the energy it brings to my life and others each and every day. And I would like to challenge you to find 3 people that haven't experienced this joy and share with them this special gift of music. Building student experience through success is my final and 7th highlighted technique that music educators use to help inspire students. It wasn't until my 4th year of being a director I truly understood this concept. And as a young band director, I ended up taking on jobs of small programs that needed some sort of program boost. Sometimes it was necessary to get enrollment numbers up, whereas other times my primary objective, according to my principals, was to get my new students to earn a superior ed assessment. Being hired under these circumstances always provided me a set of challenges in which I would have to find ways to enhance my personal skill set. I worked hard to meet the expectations of my administration, program, and community. However, I found myself working my tail off with little downtime for myself. About 10 years ago, I accepted a band director position in Northern Virginia in a district that I currently teach in. The director prior to me had gotten in trouble and was forced to resign mid-year. As a result, one of the social studies teachers at the school had been given the responsibility to temporarily take over the band program. And we're going to go ahead and call this teacher Mr. S. Mr. S had a strong musical background and marched with the cadets in his youth. He was a couple years younger than me and had the energy I desperately desired. And when I joined the program, he was contracted to run the marching portion of the band program. And I was certainly not opposed to this, especially since I had arrived on site around mid-August and he was running on all cylinders. I gladly served as a staff member under his leadership and took the opportunity to revitalize my marching band technique. The biggest challenge of being the new director at that school was replenishing the student enrollment in the band program due to a massive drop-off after the previous full-time director was released. Mr. S served as a mentor and just an all-around good guy. He clearly had a more contemporary and discovery-based approach to his teaching. The marching band operated under his vision, and our 29-member marching band ended up the season with a USSBA Class A Marching Band National Championship. This was an amazing feeling for everybody who was involved in the marching band. Mr. S had provided the students, parents, staff, community, and I a clear-cut example of how an inspirational effort can pull off any objective. Since then, the program has gone onwards and upwards to greatness. If there's a point to this post, it is this. Music educators teach students to play their instruments. They hold concerts, they do paperwork, they have non-music oriented duties, but they are so much more than that. They have the power to help shape the culture of our youth. And I learned so much from my music teachers, and I credit them for making me the type of man I am. If you are ever in a music program in which you learn how to work as a team, learn self-discipline, learn to read music, or even cultivate a passion, thank a music teacher. I would like to thank you for joining us on the 2nd episode of the Music Educator Podcast, 7 Ways Music Educators Inspire Students. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Music Educator Podcast for the latest tips, tricks, and practical advice you can use tomorrow. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Please visit the Music Educator blog at www.forthemusiceducator.com for additional posts and music education news. As always, join in the discussion and let your voice be heard by providing feedback at www.forthemusiceducator@gmail.com or leave a Google voicemail at 703-942-9883. We will see you on the next episode of the Music Educator Podcast, and remember, music can change the world.